For everyone, this is Dan Romanello, and he has worked in the newspaper industry before attending law school at the University of Florida. After serving as an assistant state attorney, he spent more than 20 years as a partner in a boutique firm running the trial practice group. An accomplished lawyer, he has litigated cases in courtroom throughout the state of Florida. And after retiring from active practice of law, he wrote his first novel, Paperboy. And currently, we're together celebrating the release of his second novel, Blindsided Justice. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, could you tell us a little bit about Blindsided Justice?
Sure. Blindsided Justice is the second book. I actually have a copy right here. It's the second book in the Dylan Tomasi series. And basically, the first, it's a standalone. You could read this book separately. That's the plan. I've got plans for at least two more in the series. Dylan Tomasi is your typical all-American feel-good story. He grew up poor. His father left him as a child. He was raised by a single mom. And along the way, while he's working his paper out, this going back to his backstory and the coming of age book, which was the first story, Paperboy, he meets a mysteriously reclusive widow who becomes his mentor and guides him through childhood, through college, and to this very day. And it's through her wealth and generosity that he has become himself a successful private investor and real estate developer living in Florida on the Florida Gulf Coast, where I live, where we're just experiencing a hurricane, and living just the American dream. So the books follow his adventures, but of course he has a close friend, an incorrigible playboy named Alex Malloy, whose womanizing is constantly getting him in trouble. And because he's become so successful, he has sort of ascended to the upper echelon of Florida society. And there's all kinds of nonsense, tomfoolery, and shenanigans going on. And he gets mixed up in the craziness. And that's really the basis for the books. And this second book really focuses on a change in how the law is enforced in the Tampa Bay area. And he is literally dropped, like with the readers, into the middle of an epic battle between justice and subversion. That's really the crux of this book. And it intersects with his goal of opening the crown jewel of a nonprofit foundation that he started. And so while all of these crazy things are going on, the book kind of pulls together at the end when he's putting on the grand opening of the youth center, which is the crown jewel of his nonprofit.
Wow, that sounds really exciting. So tell us a little bit about the Paperboy and give us a little bit more of Dylan's backstory so that we know how this plays out.
Sure. So he lives in Florida now, but he grew up in a very, very wealthy, exclusive area in Fairfield County, Connecticut, which is the wealthy enclave suburb outside of New York City. For people that aren't familiar, that's where Greenwich, Westport, Darien, all the wealthy people live. Unfortunately, he lives on the other side of the tracks in a small house with his mom. And his best friend, who he meets as a child, is the offspring of a very moneyed, successful New York family. So they're kind of an odd couple. They go to different schools, but they're brought together through their love of sports, and they become friends and remain friends. They go off to college separately, and Dylan moves to Florida shortly after graduating from the University of Connecticut, and works at a brokerage house for a few years before opening up his own business and becoming successful. Alex becomes an attorney, attends Yale, becomes an attorney, and his office is in New York, but they purchase a Tampa Bay office, and he becomes the managing partner. So he's here all the time. So their adventures continue. They move around a lot, but their adventures take place mainly in the Tampa Bay area.
It sounds really neat that you've managed to create characters that are best friends from childhood and grow separately but together throughout their lives.
Yeah, they're a yin and yang. They're very, very different. And actually, so far, each book involves Dylan coming to the aid of Alex, who gets in trouble, surprise, because he gets involved with a crazy woman. So, or let's just say a woman that ends up causing problems for him. So, yeah, so far that's been the storyline. He's a good person. He just, he came up differently, and they both have a zest for life, but and Dylan certainly loves women also. He's just nowhere near. Alex is a player, okay, and so that gets them both in trouble.
Can you tell us the impetus that just made you want to write Blindsided Justice?
So here's kind of what happened, going back to the beginning. So I retired from the practice of law in 2017. My original plan was to just take a breath, decompress. My daughter was going off to college to play softball, and I was planning on following her. She was playing major Division I softball. I was going to follow her and just take it easy. Well, in the fall of 2017, I got a call from a local college asking me if I would help coach the team, the softball team. So I said I would do that and sort of, work that out and get to see my daughter when I could, because obviously the seasons are at the same time. The school here is just a much lower level. So I did that for two years, and then COVID hit. Everything shut down. I was barred from the campus. The school was closed. The students were barred from the campus. And as far as that goes, our school that I was coaching at was very slow to open. We missed basically a season and a half.
Yeah.
And I was helping out. It certainly wasn't a career move for me. And I said, this is just not what I thought it was going to be. I started writing the first book during that downtime. I had always wanted to write. Could you think of a better time? I couldn't travel. I couldn't watch my daughter. I couldn't do my coaching job. So I started writing, and the first book was out last summer. And then
Congratulations. That
and
was
then I
quick.
was hooked. Then I was hooked. Then I
Good.
was hooked. So I immediately wrote the second book. And honestly, it doesn't take me a long time to write the books. It's getting them out. That's what takes the time. And the editing, the proofreading, getting the book printed, promotion, all that stuff. So the second book has been out exactly a month. Came out July 31st. So uh, sales, I think, are going pretty well.
Good.
And I'm happy, and I'm starting to work on number 3.
Oh, that's exciting to hear.
Yeah, I'm going to try to do one a year. That's my goal. So far I've been able to do that. Uh,
Are you planning for them all to be in this series or a different spinoff or?
I have about 6 outlined just up here, nothing on paper, just kind of outlined. 2 will be in this series for sure. So there'll be 4. And then I have a couple of standalone ideas. I write contemporary fiction. So his adventures are sort of weaved into some of the socio-political things going on. He's very apolitical. Uh, it's more cultural, social stuff. I personally am very apolitical. I do not want my books to be political. My goal is in writing is to entertain, but I feel like there is some messaging there. If somebody wants to see that, a lot of the feedback I get is mostly just, "Oh, great book, fast, reader, page turner, kept me hanging." That's really what I want to do. There's so many
Mhm.
books out there that jam people's ideology, down your throat. I don't want to be that guy. Don't want to do that. So, but it's hard to escape some of those things. And so what I try to do is take current trends and
Mhm.
sort of extrapolate them forward. And that's kind of what the books have been about so far.
But that's a little hard, isn't it? Because sometimes that what you're writing about is old news by the time you go from plot to
Very
publication.
frustrating. Very frustrating. That happened in the first book a little bit.
Hmm.
The first book revolved around the newspaper industry. The fate of the fictitious newspaper that I was writing about actually occurred somewhat to the real world newspaper here in the Tampa Bay area. So, yes, I mean, that wasn't the main thrust of the book, but it was certainly one of the subplots. So, yeah, that does happen. And I'm getting feedback on this one that, oh, this sounds like what I read in the news every day. You know, what's happening uh, in Tampa Bay, which we have a very robust law and order system here still. It's not the stuff you see sometimes in the news is not here. I mean, we still have, you know, relative law and order here. And so, you know, my book takes place where things are very different here. But certainly some of the things in my book are happening around the country.
Now, your characters are Alex and Dylan, and I want to get back to that a second because does the book focus more on Dylan than Alex?
The book focus, Dylan is the protagonist. The book is about him. Now, during the course of the book, there is some other POV, short perspectives from others. Uh, it's usually Dylan and his adventures and the intersection of what he's doing with either what's going on in the area or, you know, Alex usually drags him into his adventures as well. But I would say this book, the book really is, the focus is on Dylan. The three main characters are Dylan, Alex, and Esther. And Esther was much more uh, a central character in the first book because their
Okay.
relationship was really highlighted. She's
Mhm.
more kind of in the background this time. They mostly talk on by the phone. But whenever Dylan is sort of in a stalemate with something, he talks with her and she just gives him very clear advice and can really crystallize a good solution to whatever he's inquiring about. And along the way, he sort of starts to realize maybe she's letting me kind of try to figure things out for myself. That's a part of it. She will play a much bigger role in the next two books, but she sort of, those are my three major characters. Um,
Mhm.
and she's really in the background. Alex is, of course, very involved, but Dylan is the central character.
Now, I believe I heard you mention that you kind of modeled Esther after somebody. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
You know, I gave an interview uh, recently where the typical interview asks me, are any of these characters based on anyone you know? And the answer I usually give is absolutely not. Are you Dylan Tomasi? No, I'm not Dylan Tomasi. Are any of the characters anybody you know? And the truth is, they really aren't. I made them up. But I was asked in a recent interview, who do you admire most? And I never was asked that question before, at least since I've been really haven't ever been asked that question, I guess. But before I started writing books, no one asked me a lot of questions, except maybe my clients. Um, so I thought about it at first. I didn't really have a good answer right away. And then I thought about that. And ultimately, my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, came to mind. She was an Italian immigrant. I'm obviously Italian, if you can't tell by my last name. She was a stay at home wife and mother. She
Yeah.
did care for another family later on after my dad, you know, left the house. She raised three children of a couple of, I believe they were television executives. She lived in Norwalk, which was somewhere near, not far from Darien, which is actually the area, you know, where Dylan grew up. I grew up in Connecticut myself, but not in that area. I grew up in Western Connecticut, on the other side of the state, Southwestern Connecticut. Uh, so my grandmother was very wise. I talked to her a lot myself growing up. I didn't really have that relationship with my parents. I was the oldest. They were kind of figuring out how to be parents. And my grandmother always gave me good advice, and we were very, very close. And I always thought to myself, what if her life was different? What if she had a chance to get an education? Because she could walk into a room and immediately take over. To give you an idea, she lived in Florida for uh, the last 10 years of her life. We celebrated her 90th birthday, and all three children and the mother of the family that she took care of from the time they were little all flew to Florida and came to her party. So
Aw.
that's the kind of effect, you know, that she had on people. So then the next question was, well, any of your characters, based on anybody? And I said, my answer, I think, was no, no. But, you know, since I just answered that question, I can't help but think if there's a little bit of my grandmother in Esther Lott. But my grandmother was not a big investor. She didn't go to college like Esther did. I mean, Esther's mysterious, but you do know those things about her. She's a widow. Her husband taught school and taught swimming lessons and made much. I'm sorry, he didn't teach school. I think he was a janitor. He taught swimming lessons because he was an Olympic alternate swimmer from his native country, Germany.
Wow.
And he made more money, Esther told Dylan, giving swimming lessons to the wealthy kids, helping them improve their times and stuff, for competition. And she invested that money. And she herself became very, very wealthy. And so she shared her wisdom and ultimately some of her generosity and got Dylan his start. But he's done very, very well for himself. So that's about the closest connection. There is characteristics in the Esther character. Not a great sentence there. There are things about Esther that I think maybe remind me of my grandmother, but she certainly is not based on her. It's totally different, but that's the closest thing that I could think of to answer that question.
And maybe it's sort of the feeling that you got with her is the feeling Dylan gets with Esther.
Yes, I did. I relied on her for advice from the time I was little, when I was in college, and even afterwards. I'd still listen to, what she had to say. And it was amazing. She didn't have a lot of experience to draw from. I mean, she was dedicated to her family. She cooked wonderfully. I always wondered, why don't you open a restaurant? She just wasn't that way. It just wasn't her thing. But she always had good advice. Somehow,
it's wonderful that you got to spend time with her.
Yeah, I miss her, but I'm grateful. She lived a long time, and we had a good time together.
I'm so glad. So we discussed your writing process and a little bit about your marketing process. So what is that wave like after you get done and get that book out? What do you do? Do you do a lot of events? Do you do what kind of things do you enjoy?
First book, I winged it. First book, I just did crazy stuff. I sent books to people like Sam Sachs at the Wall Street Journal. Yeah, sure, Sam's he's going to review my book and put it in the weekend edition of the Wall Street Journal. I reached out to major podcasters. I tried to hit a grand slam. I figured if one thing landed, I'd be good, right? Well, of course, nothing landed. Nobody knew me. So I hired a marketing team for the second book. They actually put me in touch with Partners in Crime. I'm doing your tour. I have some events scheduled. I've done some book club discussions. I have an event with 5 book clubs coming up next month at a winery in New Jersey. I took the plunge into the dreaded social media world on the advice of my marketing people. Never did that. Hated it. Didn't want anything to do with it. But for you viewers out there, I'm on, what am I on? Twitter. What is it called now? X. And I'm on Facebook. So I'm there. I have a website. I have a newsletter. Ideally, I wanted to drive everything to my, through my website.
Yeah.
So those are the things I'm doing. My website's very good. My marketing team really polished it up. You can order my books. You can contact me. You can see my events. You can sign up to get my newsletter. I do a newsletter. I don't bother people a lot, but I do it. I just did a promotion where they could download a free e-reader version for like 7 days.
That's great.
All I asked for was a review and exchange. So things like that. I do different things. And I'm learning as I go, and I can see the first book, or I'm sorry, the second book was more successful, and I'm just, I'm getting some traction, and I'm excited about that.
Good. That's exciting. This whole journey is something new and different, isn't it?
Oh, it's new. Yeah, it's completely new. This is what I've learned. The writing's the easy part. It's everything that happens after the writing that's really gets me bogged down. But that's kind of all set now. I've got my events. I'm going to go do those. They're fun once they're scheduled, and start writing the next book. And that's the fun part for me. I really am hooked on that.
That's your happy place.
Yeah. That's not work. Work was what I did my whole life until I started actually, when I retired, coaching softball wasn't work. And this certainly isn't either.
Did you, in those 2 years that you were part of the softball team, did you do much traveling and stuff? Did you enjoy that?
Well, I travel. I'm a big domestic traveler, so I did a lot
Mhm.
of that when I retired. My daughter traveled a lot with her school around the country, so I went to see her quite a bit. The school that I coached at was in this what's called the Sunshine State Conference. So virtually, we would do one or two out-of-state tournaments, but most of our travel was within the state of Florida by bus. So that travel wasn't huge. The other stuff I did was either just places I wanted to go or stuff that I tagged on and watched my daughter. She was everywhere, I mean, based in Florida, but she played through the Southeast Conference. If people that know sports, that's, basically, well, college softball is a whole nother story, or college sports is a whole nother story now, but it used to be kind of regionalized. So she was playing throughout the Southeast United States, but they'd go to California and places like that. And so if it was a fun place, I was there. I'd watch her and explore the area.
So is that experience going to play out in one of your books?
It's funny you should mention that. So my daughter, COVID, affected all these athletes.
Yes.
She had a couple of years of eligibility left to pursue a master's degree. And she went to play her last 2 years in San Diego at San Diego State. Well,
Hmm.
you couldn't keep me out of San Diego. I love San Diego. So Dylan in the new book, Dylan meets a girl. She's from San Diego, and they go back there for a trip, and they visit a lot of the fun places that I like to visit in San Diego. So yes, um, so Dylan spends some time in San Diego, and I spent a lot of time in San Diego for 2 years. So yes, places I go do end up in my books, and that will continue.
It's amazing. It's a beautiful town.
Oh, I love it there. I absolutely, it's beautiful. Great place to visit, but I'm happy living here in Florida.
Good. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our viewers and let them know?
Um, I'll tell you about my last 2 days because they have been somewhat interesting.
I can imagine.
So literally 48 hours ago, I did a radio interview for my book.
Hmm.
As soon as that interview was over, I went to the hospital because I had had a problem that had gotten worse over the weekend. As this hurricane is bearing down on our area, I think they call it Idalia. There's different pronunciations. It was supposed to stay offshore, but I
Yes.
went to the hospital mid-morning Monday. They said, you need surgery. So I was admitted to the hospital. I had surgery Monday evening. They put me in recovery. I stayed over Monday night as this hospital, Northside Hospital in St. Petersburg, wonderful, wonderful doctors, nurses,
That's
staff
wonderful.
treated me exceptionally. Wow, they're taking in patients that are being transferred from the hospitals that were being evacuated. So coincidentally, my mother was at another hospital that had to be evacuated. She had her gallbladder removed. So now I'm on the same floor as my mother. She's in recovery. I'm in recovery, but I have to go home because I live in an evacuation area. My dogs are there, and they're probably going to, stop you from going over the bridge to get home. So
Right.
I said to the staff, I have to go. Monday afternoon, I have to go. So before I left, I went down to see my mother. My father was there. And I said to my father, this is the first time in my 62 years I've ever been in a hospital. He goes, I've been in a hospital one time. I broke my arm. My dad was an athlete. He goes, I broke my arm playing baseball, and they took me to the hospital. The only time in my life, and my mother, my grandmother I was just talking about, was in that hospital having her gallbladder removed. So the only time my
Wow.
father and I have ever been in a hospital, we were there while our mothers were in the same hospital with gallbladder removal surgery. But that's not the end of the story. So I come home and I'm worried about, I live 2 miles from the Gulf of Mexico
Oh, yeah.
in a waterfront neighborhood. So I
Hmm.
had to, my wonderful wife took care of, most of the stuff, got the stuff off the back patio and the decks and everything. Um, so the hurricane went by this morning. We're safe. We're good. There's still a few rain bands outside. Um, there's a lot of flooding in the area, but so far nothing with us. my thoughts and prayers go out to my neighbors north, because Big Bend was the area that got hit, and I believe it went up to a category 4.
Oh, wow.
But we're not out of trouble yet, because it's about 10:30 now, and there's a king's tide coming in a couple hours, and the water just through the normal tide, rotations is going to rise, and the water has not receded here yet. So we got to get through that. But so far we've been safe. But to say that it has been, between my radio interview on Monday and this interview, it's been an eventful 48 hours, but we're safe and sound and all is well.
But it doesn't sound like it's over yet. A few more
No,
hours.
but yeah, we got to go a few more hours to go here. Yeah, but we're much, much better off and lucky than a lot of people will be here in our state.
Wow. Yeah. I'm so happy that you were able to visit with us today.
I'm glad I could make it.
Yeah. Thanks for stopping by.
It was fun. My pleasure.
Yeah. If anyone would like to talk to Dan, visit him on his website, authordanromanello.com. And we will see you soon. Check out his book, Blindsided Justice. Have a
Thank you
great
very
day.
much, Gina. You too. Thanks.